Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a shortcut, really, into understanding something quite profound and honestly often missed. We're talking about how ideas, specifically philosophical ones, aren't just thoughts in books. They can actually steer whole societies. They push communities down certain roads, and sometimes those roads lead somewhere pretty dark.
Exactly. And our guide for this is the preface to a really powerful, quite sobering work, Georg Lukacs' The Destruction of Reason. Lukacs, who is a major figure in Marxist philosophy, gives us this incredibly critical look, almost like a forensic analysis of how a particular way of thinking what he termed irrationalism developed, especially in Germany, and how it got tangled up with some truly devastating moments in the 20th century.
Okay, so irrationalism.
Yeah.
What exactly are we talking about there?
Well, basically, it's a mode of thought that tends to push aside logic, evidence, reason, critical thinking in favor of things like intuition, maybe strong emotions, gut feelings, even creating myths.
Got it. So our mission today is to really unpack how philosophy is, well, deeply connected to social and political stuff. We'll explore Lukacs' big claim that there's no such thing as an innocent philosophy. We're going to try and trace how this irrationalism developed, from its early beginnings right through to its most alarming real-world forms.
And Lukacs' core idea really challenges how we might usually think about philosophy. He's saying it's not just this separate history of smart people having clever thoughts. No. Instead, the big questions philosophy asks and the answers people come up with. They're fundamentally shaped by deeper things, like how societies organize production, major social shifts, the constant struggles between different classes.
So if you look at philosophy just on its own,
you get what he calls an idealist distortion, a skewed picture. You miss the real-world engine driving those ideas.
which brings us back to that no innocent philosophy idea. That really lands, doesn't it?
It does, because what Lukacs means is any philosophical position automatically takes a side. It's either siding with reason or against reason. And reason itself, for Lukacs, is never something politically neutral.
How so?
He sees reason as a kind of mirror. It reflects whether a society's setup is fundamentally rational or irrational, whether it's helping progress or holding it back. So your philosophy isn't just a personal taste. It's taking a stand on where society's heading.
And he applies this directly to Germany's history.
Very directly. His whole aim in the book is to show that Germany's concrete path to Hitler, as he puts it, wasn't just reflected in the philosophy of the time. The philosophy itself, acting as an intellectual mirroring, actually helped speed up that terrible process.
So philosophy wasn't just watching from the sidelines.
Not at all. It was an active player shaping the intellectual climate that made that dark turn possible.
And his critique, it wasn't just about condemning these ideas.
No, not just dismissal. He insists on getting inside these reactionary philosophies to show their inner incoherence, their contradictoriness, using their own logic against them. He calls it an immanent critique.
Okay, digging into their own arguments to show the flaws.
Exactly. That, plus understanding where they came from socially and what they did in society, that's how he demonstrates why they fail, not just that they fail.
Right. So how does he map out this history of irrationalism?
Well, he breaks it down into two main phases, always stressing this constant battle with progressive ideas. Phase 1 roughly runs from the French Revolution, 1789, up to the revolutions of 1848. In this period, irrationalism emerged fighting against the idealist dialectical historical concept of progress.
Okay, that's the kind of Hegelian idea. History moving forward through logic and ideas.
Precisely. And during this time, Lukacs traces the road from Schelling to Kierkegaard. Irrationalism starts off as a kind of feudal, aristocratic reaction against the French Revolution's changes. But then it sort of morphs into a more bourgeois or middle-class suspicion of any kind of real social progress.
Okay, then comes phase 2, and this is where things get, well, really unsettling, as you said.
Yes. Phase 2 starts after 1848, but really ramps up after the Paris Commune in 1871. Now, the opponent changes dramatically. It's not just bourgeois idealism anymore. The new enemy is dialectical and historical materialism.
So Marx's ideas, the proletarian, working class worldview.
Exactly. The view that material conditions and class struggle are the real historical drivers. And here's Lukacs' crucial point. Figures like Nietzsche, who he sees as the first major voice of this second phase, and those who followed. They show this remarkable reluctance, maybe even inability, really to study the opponent and to refute him in a serious manner.
So they weren't genuinely grappling with Marxist ideas.
Apparently not. Instead of honest intellectual debate, Lukacs sees an increasing slide into distortion of the facts, calumny, and demagoguery.
Yep, like slander. And demagogy appealing to prejudice.
Yes. It makes you think of what Marx himself observed after 1848. Les capacités de la bourgeoisie s'en vont. The bourgeoisie's abilities are declining. For Lukacs, this marked a serious lowering of the philosophical level. It led to just arbitrariness, contradictions, unsubstantiated and sophistic arguments becoming common in later irrationalist thought.
And this decline wasn't just accidental.
No. He argues it reached its most obvious, most chilling expression in the National Socialist outlook in Nazi Germany. But the decline itself, the lowering of standards, paradoxically, it revealed a kind of deep unity within irrationalism's path.
How so, if the quality was declining?
Because it wasn't just random thinkers being less rigorous. Lukacs argues it was a necessary, socially determined phenomenon. It served a social purpose.
Okay, what purpose?
This leads to his idea of the strategic withdrawal. He talks about how after the war, there was this tendency to retreat, intellectually speaking, to distance figures like Hitler and Rosenberg may be seen as substandard, and elevate supposedly more eminent thinkers like Spengler, Heidegger, or Nietzsche.
Right, trying to salvage the respectable parts of the tradition.
Lukacs sees it as more calculated than that, a counter-revolutionary tactic. The aim was to salvage on the ideological plane the essence, the core reactionary ideas tied to German monopoly capitalism. It was like regrouping the reactionary forces, refining the message for a methodologically improved offensive later on.
Wow. A tactical retreat to fight another day, ideologically. That makes a chilling kind of sense. And when you look at the core themes of irrationalism across its history, they're surprisingly consistent, aren't they?
Very consistent. You see this pattern.
Yeah.
The disparagement of understanding and reason, constantly undermining critical thought, the uncritical glorification of intuition, just trust your gut, ignore the facts, and aristocratic epistemology, this idea that real knowledge is only for a select few, not for everyone.
Like an intellectual elite.
Exactly. Then there's the rejection of socio-historical progress, denying that the society can actually get better in fundamental ways. And crucially, the creating of myths, building these powerful narratives that appeal to emotion, not reality.
Lukacs calls these elements monochrome and threadbare, like a worn-out repetitive pattern.
Yes, and he says that repetition reflects the uniformly reactionary social foundations of irrationalism. It's the same basic social agenda underneath, just dressed up differently over time.
So to really get German irrationalism, Lukacs pinpoints three key things.
Yes, three interconnected factors.
Yeah.
First, its development wasn't just ideas evolving in a vacuum. It was deeply tied to major class struggles. It was responding to social conflict.
No imminent philosophical development, as he puts it.
Right. Second, the content and methods were remarkably uniform over time. This led to its scope getting narrower and it becoming more apologetic, defending the existing system, and more demagogic, using emotional appeals.
Okay. Tied to class struggle, uniform content getting narrower and nastier. And the third?
A direct result of the first two. A necessary, constant, and rapid decline in the philosophical level. And this, Lukacs argues, is precisely how someone like Hitler could take these originally complex philosophical ideas and simplify them, popularize them for mass political mobilization. The groundwork had been laid by this intellectual decay.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more. Germany was the hotbed, the classic land for studying this.
Yes, like England was for Marx studying capitalism, the place where the phenomenon was most developed and clear.
But Lukacs stresses this isn't just a German story.
Absolutely not. He's emphatic. Irrationalism is an international phenomenon. It popped up everywhere, even if Germany played a leading role early on.
With figures like Schelling, Schopenhauer.
And especially Nietzsche. Nietzsche became a kind of international paradigm, a model for this way of thinking and expressing it. Even later thinkers like Heidegger, had a profound and dangerous influence on bourgeois thought outside Germany, like in the U.S. Spengler, too, became a global model for a certain kind of historical philosophy.
So let's look at some of these other countries. Italy, for example. Benedetto Croce.
Ah, Croce, a fascinating case. Lukacs calls him an example of liberal reactionary irrationalism. Now, Croce actually opposed fascism publicly, but Lukacs argues his philosophy did something insidious. He took Hegel, a philosopher all about reason and historical progress, and twisted his ideas into a form of irrationalism by saying things like, history is always a history of the present. Essentially, he removed objective reason from understanding society and politics. Reason became something for bourgeois decadent use, as Lukacs puts it, like for appreciating art or personal reflection, but not for analyzing or changing the harsh social reality. So even though he disliked fascism, his philosophy intellectually served the interests of the imperialist era, according to Lukacs.
Interesting. Okay, what about English-speaking countries? William James and pragmatism.
Right, James. Lukacs sees pragmatism as offering an irrationalist substitute for a worldview. James famously said practice or usefulness is the test of truth. But, and this is key, he cut that link to objective reality.
So truth isn't about matching reality, it's just about what works for me.
Exactly. It becomes subjectivistic irrationalism. Truth is whatever feels useful or beneficial to the individual. This offered a kind of philosophical comfort, Lukacs says. It allowed for irrational arbitrariness in life. James literally argued you could believe in God, the God of any religion or sect, whatever, without clashing with what science demands of an up-to-date gentleman.
Wow. Basically a philosophical green light to believe whatever feels good.
Pretty much. It justifies convenient beliefs over objective assessment.
Okay, let's hop over to France. Henri Bergson.
Bergson. Lukacs argues he took modern agnosticism, the idea that we can't know ultimate truth, and pushed it into openly proclaiming of myths. Bergson's whole philosophy championed intuition over intellect, subjective experience or duration over objective reality and science.
And this had problematic consequences.
Very much so. There's this stark quote from Pulitzer, a communist resistance fighter who criticized Bergson. Pulitzer said, "In duration, a pogrom happens in the same way as a revolution." His point was, if everything is just subjective flow without objective standards, then horrific violence and social transformation become morally blurred, indistinguishable on some abstract level.
That's chilling. It loses all moral grounding.
Precisely. So Bergson's apparent political neutrality, Lukacs argues, had a confusing and misleading effect, pushing things in a reactionary direction by dissolving objective criteria.
And what about sociology? You mentioned that field too.
Yes. Lukacs next looks at early Western sociology figures like Le Bon, Pareto, Robert Morales. He argues they often worked to de-economize and dehistoricize society, meaning they took economic factors and historical change out of the analysis.
Why would they do that?
To argue that capitalism was basically permanent and socialism impossible, to justify these perennial, unchanging social categories. Le Bon focused on irrational crowd psychology to argue against democracy. Pareto talked about elites just circulating, meaning no fundamental change is possible. Michels even argued that labor movements inevitably become bureaucratic and middle class, his iron law of oligarchy, making real working-class revolution a sociological impossibility.
So using sociology to argue that the way things are is the only way they can be.
Essentially, yes. Intellectual tools to naturalize the existing power structure.
And finally, Georges Sorel, also in France.
Sorel. Lenin called him the well-known advocate of confusion, which tells you something. He was a petty bourgeois intellectual caught between classes who rejected Marx's dialectics. Instead, he grabbed onto James's pragmatism and Bergson's intuitionism.
And did what with them?
He made what Lukacs colorfully calls an irrational intellectual salto mortai, a death-defying leap into myth. Specifically, the myth of the general strike and the myth of proletarian use of violence. It was this abstract, emotional embrace of action for action's sake, completely detached from rational analysis or historical context, driven by a hatred of bourgeois culture, but unable to escape its ways of thinking.
And the connection here gets really dark, doesn't it?
It does, because Sorel's theory of myth, which was exclusively emotional, so empty of meaning, was explicitly picked up by Mussolini. Mussolini actually said, "We have created a myth for ourselves. Myth is a faith, a passion. It does not have to be a reality. It is real by virtue of the fact that it is a spur and a faith and signifies valor."
Wow, he just openly admits it doesn't have to be real.
Exactly. And for Lukacs, this is the smoking gun. It shows how the epistemology of pragmatism and Bergsonian intuition, their theories of knowledge based on feeling and usefulness, has become the vehicle of fascist ideology. It demonstrates how seemingly abstract philosophical ideas, once they jettison reason and objective truth, can be turned into weapons for political manipulation and violence.
So wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway from Lukacs' deep dive for us today?
Well, it's a really powerful, maybe even scary warning, isn't it? His analysis hammers home that a philosophical stance, no matter how abstract it seems, no matter if it claims neutrality, cannot be innocent. It always has an objective effect in the world.
Right. It always ends up taking a side, whether intended or not.
Precisely. And the really crucial takeaway is this. The possibility of a fascist, aggressively reactionary ideology is objectively contained in every philosophical stirring of irrationalism. Lukacs isn't necessarily saying Bergson or Spengler wanted fascism. Some were clearly uncomfortable with where it led, but their philosophical frameworks, by undermining reason and objective reality, created openings that could be exploited and were exploited to develop those destructive ideologies.
It really underscores the responsibility that comes with ideas.
Immense responsibility. It's a call to be aware of this damaging, menacing legacy, as Lukacs might put it, to be critical consumers and producers of ideas, understanding they're never just happening in a vacuum. They connect to the real, messy, sometimes dangerous world.
So this whole exploration is really an invitation, isn't it, for you listening right now, to think about the ideas floating around today, the trends, the narratives, the ways of thinking that feel comfortable or easy.
Yeah. As you navigate all the information coming at you, maybe ask, what contemporary ideas are shaping our future, perhaps without us fully realizing it? What might be the philosophical comfort of our time, the things that make us feel good or simplify complexity? And crucially, what hidden costs might that comfort carry for real, meaningful societal progress? That's definitely something worth mulling over.